Hi everyone, I'm Will Brown and welcome to the WP Quickies series, bite-sized WordPress tips and tricks in 30 minutes or less. So today is one for current or budding developers, how to start using the WordPress debug log in your PHP themes and plugins. So thanks for taking the time to join with me, yes, on this very, very chilly day in Sydney, Kingsley. Yes, definitely. Hi to everyone, thanks for joining me. If you are on YouTube, make sure you subscribe and ding that bell. And if you're on Facebook, give me a big thumbs up. Drop me a line in the comments. Let me know where you are from. Jean is, same weather up here on the Central Coast. I think everyone's getting a really bad deal today. Winter has definitely set in. This is definitely the coldest day this year anyway. Tipper is joining us from a wild and woolly Wigong. Yes, I think New South Wales, I think all of the East Coast is getting battered with this Arctic blast just now. So, yep, hopefully heaters on in the chilly northern beaches for you, Paul, as well. Thanks very much for sending your comments. Let me know who's online. If you have any questions for today, drop them in the comments below. Start with a hashtag ask, just so I can easily scroll through and find them. And I'm going to get started on today. So, using WordPress debug log. So let's face up to facts. We are not all perfect and we're going to make mistakes when we're developing WordPress themes and plugins. So sure, turning on the visual debugging is a step forward in having a written WordPress debug log of issues that you can refer back to, I think is essential for a debugging process. So in this WP Quickies, I'm going to show you how to enable the WordPress debug mode and how to write your own custom errors to the debug log file. And we have Joey J on Singapore from always. Hopefully, Joey, it's not as cold as in Singapore as it is here in Sydney. So thanks for joining us. Okay, so I've got quite a lot of screenshots here, so quite a lot of information on the screen, so you can look back and see all the definitions and stuff that are on screen. And I'll copy and paste some of this stuff and the links as well in the description below at the end of the video, at the end of this one, just so you've got it there for you. Okay, so it's pretty easy to enable the debug log for WordPress. The basic thing is you're going to have to locate your wp-config.php file. That's the WordPress file that's got all the configuration, all the settings for how the WordPress environment, how the WordPress application runs in. So locate that file. It's usually in your root folder of your web hosting provider. That's usually maybe a public HTML. Or it could be HTTP docs as well. So find that file, wp-config.php, and open it up in a text editor or your IDE or whatever it is you use to edit your WordPress files in. Now, when you're in that file, first thing I want you to do is do a search for wp_debug, because those are the lines, those are the configuration lines that we need to locate and add to this WP config file to enable the debugging. Now, sometimes web hosts, so your web provider might add these files in for debugging if there's been some issues in the past. Otherwise, they just might not be present at all in your config file. And this is why we are doing a little bit of a search up front just to see if we can find them. So if you have found them, that's great. If they're there, you can copy, you can basically go into those lines and edit them and make sure that they are true, false, and true for those ones. If not, then just copy these 3 lines. Now, you need to copy them above. Now, there's a comment in the config file that says, that's all, stop editing, happy blogging. You need to copy all of your definitions, all your configuration options above that line for there. So for these 3 lines, copy those above, find that comment and just go a few spaces above and copy them if they're not already there in your configuration file. Okay, so these are the 3 basic WordPress debugging defines or configuration options. The first one is define, and then you've got a wp_debug, and we're setting that to true. Now, setting this to false, WordPress will ignore any other wp_debug settings. So if you've got that false, it doesn't matter if your display is true or your log is true, it will ignore that if the overall debugging is set to false. So this is the very first one. So set that one to true, and that enables the WordPress debug mode. Now, the second line, which is wp_debug_display, and we're going to set that to false. Now, I really, really hate I really hate having all the PHP errors there displayed on the screen. I don't think it's of any use to me or anyone else, and you certainly wouldn't want this option setting true in a production environment. And unfortunately, if you don't include that line there, when you enable the WP_debug to true, then unfortunately this debug display is set to true as well. So if you're just enabling WordPress debug mode by that single line, WP_debug and set that to true. If you don't have any of these other lines in there, it's going to start outputting all those PHP warnings and errors directly to your screen, to the website, which is no good to man nor beast. So definitely remember to add this line as well and set it to false. We don't want any of these errors coming out onto the screen, not in your development environment and definitely not in production. And now the third line there is defining the WP_debug_log, and we're going to set that to true. And this is where WordPress will enable the file login. Now the default is written to your WP-content folder, and it's a file called debug.log. And don't worry for those guys who are coming in late. That's all. It's all recorded, Alan. So don't worry. You can go back on YouTube and you watch it from the beginning there. Okay, next slide. Okay, now those are the three basic options for debugging, and that will enable the WordPress general debug to start debugging PHP stuff and output it to your debug.log file. But there's a couple of advanced debugging options that you can switch on as well. If you're into kind of more advanced stuff, if you're a plugin developer or a big theme developer, you might want to turn these on too. And the first one is, and again, you'd add these underneath those three lines and above that comment line in your configuration file. The first one is defining a script_debug and setting that to true. Now, what happens is when you're normally running a WordPress environment, it's using libraries that are all compiled and optimized for a production environment. If you want to get more information out of those libraries, then you want to set this line to true, the script debug to true. And what will happen is WordPress detects this configuration option. It's going to stop using the production libraries and it's going to use the development libraries as well. So libraries that are in the code, it's in the code base for WordPress, but they're not referenced because they're referencing the optimized production environment files. So if you want extra debugging, then set this to true and WordPress will switch from the production libraries and it'll switch over to the development libraries if there's any. And what you'll see is normally development libraries have a lot more verbose debugging and output from them just to help developers figure out what's happening along in those different libraries, you know, when your events being cascaded down the line. So it's a really great option to put in if you're really kind of debugging a big bit of code and you're wondering what's going on with WordPress when it's, you know, running through all these libraries. So that is a script_debug is true. The next one is if you are trying to debug some of the queries in the database. So if you've got a bit of code and it's querying some stuff from the database, it might be posts, it might be post meta, it could be users, user meta, it could be some custom post types. But if you're not quite sure what's going on in that database and what WordPress is querying and what's coming back, then you can switch on this line as well in your configuration file. It's called save queries. So setting that to true, and what WordPress will do is it will save all the database queries that it is doing into an array and then put that into the debug.log so that when you look through the log file, you can see exactly what WordPress, the SQL statements it's using to get the information out of the database. So that's a great tip if you're doing trying to debug information that's grabbing stuff out of the database. Certainly you want to save, you want to put that one on save queries as true. Now, a bit of a note, so debugging in general is going to have a performance hit on the server, but especially that very, very last one. And well, both those ones actually, but certainly the last one, because WordPress makes an awful lot of calls to the database. You'd be quite surprised, you know, just like getting a post out of a database can be like maybe like 50 or 100 separate SQL queries to grab all the content and data from everywhere. So if that's all being written to a file, that's going to really churn up your server resources. So definitely turn these on a development or staging environment. And if you need to do it on production, then turn it on. do whatever you're doing, go do the process that you're trying to debug, turn it off, and then go into your debug file and have a look and see what the information is in there. So yeah, just a quick note is that any debugging at all is going to increase your server performance, but especially these two lines here, and especially that last one as well. Okay, so I have, let's just copy this link. If I can copy this link here, is it going to let me? There we go, copy that. I have a post on my website that tells you, I'm going to post this here in the comments, which shows you how to rename the default debug.log path and file name. Now, I usually rename this file. I usually prefix the debug.log with a tilde. That's a little kind of wavy thing there. And change the file path as well from the WP content just to the same folder where the WP-config file is, just so I don't have to be clicking up and down into another folder. It saves me a lot of time. Now, I have all my project files in a Dropbox folder, so I can synchronize those with all the different devices that have my laptop, my tablets, and my desktop machines. Now, Dropbox, it ignores files that are prefixed with a tilde, and I find that very useful because my configuration environment is slightly different between all devices, and I don't want the debug log file syncing between machines for that reason, because that slight change in environment might be the change that's causing the problem on whatever machine it is. So, so a little bit of tip there. You know, I don't want debug log files being synchronized with Dropbox. And if you do the same, if you've got your projects on Dropbox, then you know you can put a tilde in front of this log file, and it's not going to be synchronized up and down to your other devices. So that's what I do there. And that's a little bit of code to do this. So find that line, that very first line. So that's the WP_debug_log, where it's writing it out. You want to change that to false. And the reason we're changing that to false is we don't want WordPress to go through the function of creating the file name debug.log in the WP-content. We want to take over that process. So we tell WordPress, don't use a debug log file, and then we go straight into PHP, and the PHP has settings to enable login, and that's what WordPress does, except WordPress wraps it around with a function so it can control where the output goes. So set the WP_debug log to false, and then we add in these two separate lines. The first one is any_set, and we're telling PHP to log errors. So log errors and is number 1. You could put true there as well, because true is the same as 1, but any set errors, log errors as 1. And that's telling WordPress I want to start logging errors out to a file. And then we use the same command, any set, to tell the error_log, and then we give it a file name. Now, the dir name __file__, that basically just means use the same file path as this file where this code is in, which in this case is the wp-config.php. So it's using the same directory there. And then I've got a slash, and then I'm just calling it, underscore, and then debug log. Sorry, maybe it's $. Maybe it's a $$ that Dropbox ignores. I think it's not just a tilde. It could be the tilde and $. And Dropbox will ignore any files that has that prefix there. So that's what I set there. That's what I do in my development environment, so that Dropbox doesn't sync any of that, and I bring it down from the WP content down to the same level as the configuration file for there. So that's how to rename the default debug log file. You can put it in any folder you like and give it any name you like, and just gives you a little bit more flexibility, a little bit more control over your environment. Now, here is a typical debug log file. I've taken this from one of my development sites. Every entry starts with a date and a timestamp in square brackets and on a new line, and then followed by the debug output. Now, normally you're going to find 3 different notices in there. You're going to find something called a PHP notice, something called a PHP warning, and something called a PHP error message. Now, notices are something of note that you should probably address at some point. Warnings, PHP warnings, they are likely to cause an issue if they are not addressed soon. And PHP errors, well, they are what they say they are, and they could cause things not to work, including PHP causing that infamous white screen of death. So we can see here there's a few stuff in here at the very top. We've got an entry that says name was called incorrectly for a webhook. And then the next one down there is an order being created. So this is the webhook that's running. Orders being created, here's the webhook ID, the resource ID, and then the object data in there. So that gives you an idea of kind of what to expect when you're looking through the debug file. And it's just a text file, so you can load it into any particular system, Notepad, or whatever you use on the Apple Macs as well. I use a PHP Storm IDE, and it recognizes the WordPress debug.log format and just highlights it in nice colors, which is really, really nice and easy to scroll down and look through. Okay, so here we come to the part where we're probably looking forward to, writing your own code to the debug file. So writing your own information to the debug file. Now, there is a PHP file called error_log, and that writes information directly to the debug log, which we've set to be a file-based thing. Now, there's reasons we could use that directly, but the good reason why you maybe shouldn't do is that using this error_log under certain bits of data, it's not going to write it out properly. So, for example, it's got problems formatting arrays and objects. So if you pass an array or an object into error log, it's going to complain because the data format isn't what it expected, and it's not going to output it into the log. And one of the great things about using a debug log file is that you can dump arrays and object data in there to see exactly what you've got and what you're working with. So this little function here, you can paste that into your theme functions.php file, or you can write a little plugin and just add it in. What it basically says is if the function exists, or if it doesn't, if this function write_log doesn't exist, then we define the function. That just makes sure that if someone else has defined a function called write_log, that it doesn't create two functions and then PHP is going to bomb out. So if this function doesn't exist, write_log, then we're going to create this function. And all it does is we're passing the log information in. So it's information you want to pass in, you're writing out to the file. It detects two things. If it's an array or if it's an object, then it prints out to the error log using the print_r, which is a PHP way of grabbing the data in an array or an object and just making it available to be put out in a string format, so it can go to file easily. Else it just logs the message. So it detects for an array, it detects for an object, and just makes sure that the output for that is compatible to be written to a log file. So that's it. That's really, really simple function. It's just using the built-in PHP error log, wrapping a little function around, and it's really, really, really simple to use. So here's an example of how you can use it. Two examples here. The last one is just write_log. So that's the function we created. The __line__, that is going to take the PHP line number in your code and put it out to the debug file, so you know exactly where in the file that's running. So I use that quite often. Sometimes if I'm trying to locate what's happening in a process, I'll write some logs, maybe 5 or 6 in different areas, just so I know where I am, whereabouts the error is located and which line number is as well. Now, the very first one here is a little bit more complicated, but it gives you a good use case. So this one is basically saying if a user is logged in, I want to get the current ID of that user, and I'm going to write to the log file, I'm writing to the debug log file, processing user ID with that ID number. So that sort of stuff can be used in a loop when it's going around to see exactly what data you're processing and what's being processed at a particular point. So if you have errors that are coming out, you can look through the debug file and you see I'm processing this user and then that user and this user. Oh, that user's failed. Why is that user failed? And you can look into the data a little bit more. So a little bit of ideas there onto how and when you can use your own debug information and putting that out into the log. And I think this is going to be really helpful for developers and for theme developers as well, just to start on that journey of debugging. Now, debugging, of course, is a lot more complicated than that. You've not just got PHP errors, which this is covering today. You've also got JavaScript errors, and they are output to the web browser console as well, not through this error log system. And of course, you don't have to just use the WordPress login system. You can download some libraries from GitHub and have a more complicated log file, particularly that's sitting inside your plugin or your theme, which is what I personally use for my plugins. But this one, using the WordPress debug file, I think is a great start. it's a good starter that you can get into the idea and the concept of logging, and then generate your own information and put that into those log files. So guys, if you have any questions, you can pop them down in the comments. Philip is saying that print.r is very handy. It is, absolutely. I use it all the time. It's basically the best way to take an array or an object and print it out so you know exactly what it contains. There's quite a lot of times when I'm processing custom data or from custom queries that the PHP script will fail. And the first thing I do is I figure out what data what data is that function acting on, and I'll print that out using print.r out to the debug file, and then you can scan then to say, all right, okay, now it's failing because user meta first name is missing, or email is in incorrect format. So very, very useful using print.r. I love it. It's great. Guys, I'm looking at the iPad, I can't see any other questions coming in, and that's fine. And we're doing a really quick quickie one today, quite a simple one as well, from a development point of view. If you are around next week, I am going to be talking a little bit again more about kind of server and techie stuff. I kind of dip in and out of beginners and intermediate and kind of development and advanced stuff. So next week, we're going to be talking about PHP extensions for WordPress. More specifically, which PHP extensions do you need to install on your web server to make WordPress run properly, and some additional ones that you might want to install for some edge use cases as well. So if you're around next week, you can join me on that one for PHP extensions for WordPress. Thanks, Phil. Yep, good refresh. Awesome. Thanks for the feedback. Again, if you've got any other topics that you'd like me to discuss, just drop them into this little Google form. You can find the link in the form in the description to the video for today, or you can go back and quickly scan that QR code, and that'll take you to the Google form. And just a little bit of shout out for WPAustralia.org. You can find out what meetups are running across Australia just now, which ones are online and which ones are physical. We do have some physical ones going ahead at the moment. And also there's a link to sign up and join us on Slack, there's our Slack group there with lots of channels and the whole WordPress community in there engaging and chatting about not just WordPress, but life, business, just random stuff as well. It's just good to have some people on hand. We can't go out too much, and the virus is still around, and so this is kind of our best way to catch up virtually with everyone all over Australia. A little bit of shout out for my website owners survival guide. So if you are a developer or designer, if you host people's websites, if you give them a support plan, then check out that website. It could add a little bit onto your recurring revenue in the end. And yeah, happy to connect with me. So I'm mostly on LinkedIn nowadays. I'm building up a little bit of audience on Instagram as well, and sometimes on Twitter. So happy for you to connect with me. If you are connecting with me on LinkedIn, then just drop me a little note as well with a connection and let me know where you're coming from the WP Quickies, just so I know it is you guys. So thanks very much for today. Join me next week when we are talking more about the, what are we talking about? PHP extensions for WordPress, and that'll be a good one. So thank you very much. Make sure your heater's on, keep nice and warm today, and I'll check out everything for that and see you next week. Bye.